Well, thank you guys all for being here and taking the time to do this. This is our 2023 Lab Supervisor Training um, long-term ongoing collaboration between 365 Health and Quest Diagnostics, and we couldn't be happier. So we are excited to move into the spring this year. So I'm just going to get started. I'm going to try to make this under an hour, but like Alex said, you guys are welcome to ask questions or put something in the chat. She'll holler at me if I don't notice it. So here we go. So I'm not sure how many of you have done this before, how many are new to this. What's important about this to know is that this is kind of a quick overview of everything. There's certainly a lot more information in the Lab Supervisor Manual that you have been or will be mailed. They should, 99% of them have gone out. If you are concerned about that, please reach out to Alex or Kristen, verify an address, and just let them know that you haven't received it yet. Then they will send that over to me in a spreadsheet all at once, so it's not a 1,000 emails back and forth. Along with that lab manual, what's important is that you get it and you read through it, at least give it a cursory glance, especially if you've never done this before. Read through it just to familiarize yourself with everything. It looks a little different this year. It's actually loose pages in a folder. We found that a lot of people really want to make copies of different things, maybe put it out at the tables, things like that. And it's a lot easier if it's not bound together. There's also going to be a lot of visual aids, some extra training materials. You are welcome to copy anything that you see in the Lab Supervisor Manual and bring it to your fair to hand to your phlebotomists, centrifugers, or for yourself. So let's get into what job you signed up for. The lab supervisor is responsible for everything that goes on in the laboratory. Part of that is setting up and tearing down the lab area. So before and after the fair, it's your job to train the phlebotomists and centrifuges the day of the day of the fair, and to supervise everything that goes on in the laboratory. You also are responsible for controlling the supplies and overseeing the final packing step for the courier to pick up. I know a lot of our lab supervisors are also medical people. Just beware that you can't be sitting at the table drawing blood all day and also supervise all the activities that go on in the laboratory. So you kind of need to be up and be mobile. I'm not going to yell at you if there's a really hard stick and you're a really good phlebotomist and you feel the need to help out. We're here for the participants. But all in all, your job is to keep moving and kind of stay hovering over everybody. Hi. Lab setup and supply information. To the left is a photograph of half of what a lab supervisor or a lab station for a phlebotomist looks like. And you're going to get a kit, which is this brown box that you can see it there at the top right corner. We're going to open the kit. The lid serves as a tray to put tubes and hubs in. The kit is to be shared between two phlebotomists at a table. So in this scenario, there'd be somebody over to the right of that's sharing out of that middle section that has their own sharps container and their own chucks. Gloves, there may or may not be a single box for each person. The glove boxes have something like 200 gloves in them. So it's perfectly acceptable for one box of gloves to be used at a table. The second phlebotomist can grab a handful of those gloves and put them on their side of the table. The idea of a lot of this is that we do want to conserve our supplies. Everybody wants to come in the first moment and open every single thing, every kit, every box, everything. We would prefer that we start out a little conservative at the beginning of the fair. Once the supplies get spread out around the room, it looks like there's not enough stuff, but there really is. We determine the supplies. There's a lot of variables that go into it and a lot of discussion that goes into it. So there are enough supplies there. So if we start out a little conservatively with, a few tubes and hubs, you can always add to that if that phlebotomist is moving along and getting a lot done. But if supplies have all been opened, we really can't send them along to the next fair. And again, in the interest of conservation, say the tubes, let's not open all the tubes up at the very beginning. You're welcome to open the containers whenever you need them. But if they are actually sealed and don't get used, I can send those on to another fair and help supply somebody else. So that is part of why we ask that you be a little conservative with that, okay? So your phlebotomists, when they come in, they all must sign a phlebotomy agreement form. You're going to find copies of that in your lab supervisor book. If you need to make more copies, please feel free. That just acknowledges that they are there to volunteer. They are a phlebotomist with proficient stick time. It also is a way for us and 365 Health to have kind of a database of who volunteered at this fair. Maybe we can ask them next year to volunteer again. So that's a really useful piece for both of our teams here. In the beginning of the fair, usually they start about 7 or 8 early in the morning. The phlebotomist should be arriving about a half hour before the fair. This is your time to gather them all together and give them the training about the equipment, procedures, the expectations for the laboratory, give them time so that they can look at requisitions, ask questions, all of that. The equipment that we have this year, we used to have a brand of needle called BD. We are now with a group called Griner. So the needles, the hubs, and the tubes may look a little different. Any phlebotomist should know how to use any of that equipment, but some people may have not seen this specific equipment. So it's definitely worth the time to let them look at things. If they want to put together a needle just to test it out, that I'm fine with that. Give them the time to answer questions that they might have. This next little part here is at your discretion. We've always had a one stick policy with phlebotomy. However, with some phlebotomists, I mean, I'm a phlebotomist of 20 years, and I occasionally don't get blood when I draw the first time. If I feel confident and you think that your phlebotomist is strong enough to take a second stick and the participant agrees to that, that is acceptable. That being said, when you start out the day, you're going to kind of get everybody set up at their stations. I like to, and when I am a lab supervisor, take a walk around the room. That's my chance when everybody's doing that first round of phlebotomy to check that they're labeling everything correctly, kind of assess their skills and see who might need a little bit of help or a little bit of direction. And also that's my opportunity to look and say, this phlebotomist right here is really, really good. That person could probably help with hard sticks. And also if that person wants to make a second attempt, that would be acceptable with me. This policy is always at the discretion of the lab supervisor. It is also always at the discretion of the participant. So if a phlebotomist is going to attempt a second stick, they need to ask for permission. And if a participant says, no, I don't want you to do it again, that is perfectly fine. We will find one of the hard stick phlebotomists to do it. A student phlebotomist, you're going to have some of those at your fairs. They always have to be accompanied by an instructor. The instructor is there to oversee their work. They're not there to draw blood. Again, if they have a really difficult time, they can step in for a single draw, but they really need to watch over their students. And the reason for that is, as a lab supervisor, you don't have the time to be focused on how the students are practicing their skills and manage the entire laboratory section. So they really need to be there with an instructor. If students show up and do not have an instructor, they can be redirected to do other tasks. They can help with centrifuge. They could help with handing out juice. They can hand out with form check, things like that, but we will not have students drawing without an instructor present. And the instructors know this, so it's not usually an issue. All right, I see that there are things in the chat. What?
First we were talking about whether or not we could see you, and I'm making sure everyone saw the presentation. And then there was a question
Oh,
about butterflies, which I believe you're covering later, correct?
I will. I can actually address that right now. And no, you can't see me while I'm sharing. Plus, I don't have a camera on my computer because I work with a lot of sensitive things, and there's no point in you seeing the messy office I sit in either. So, but as long as you can see the presentation, that's what matters here. I'm not sure exactly what the question about butterflies is. There is a handout that is included in your lab supervisor booklet this year. People always want to use butterflies. A lot of people are used to drawing with butterflies almost exclusively. We, however, only have a limited number of butterflies that we can send out. As far as I'm concerned, who gets to use butterflies? That's kind of also along the lines of when you take that first run around the room. If people are very competent, I don't mind butterflies. Butterflies do have an increased risk of needle stick. They have an increased risk of hemolysis. So that is the reason that we go with the straight needles. You will receive a certain number of butterflies. There are also extra supplies that are being sent to sites. 365 Health liaisons also may have a little bit of a backstock of butterflies, but we are still asking that we use those very conservatively, and people who are really proficient with them. But any phlebotomist should be able to use a straight needle. So I hope that addressed the question. If not, go ahead and chat and Alex will holler at me. Okay. Let's keep moving here. There we are. More phlebotomy requirements. I said it before, but when you do that setup, they can share the phlebotomy kit, they can share supplies, they can share that paper rack that all the specimens and the papers go under. They cannot share a sharps container. We do not want needles crossing over into the same container. So we definitely need a separate sharps for each phlebotomist. Phlebotomists are to wear gloves on both hands and change them between each draw. No pulling off of fingers so you can feel a vein better. Gloves are the gold standard now, and that's a hard and fast rule. So if somebody is pulling their finger off so they can feel a vein, that's unacceptable and that needs to be addressed. If they're having that trouble feeling the vein, maybe that participant should go to a different phlebotomist that can maybe help do it a little bit better with gloves on, but that's hard and fast rule. As far as tubes for drawing, we have SST tubes and we have lavender top tubes. The SST tubes can be used for 3 to 4 tests. We've broken it down, this first line about the chemistry panel, PSA, CRP, and COVID antibody. Those are like the more commonly ordered tests. If all 4 of those tests are ordered, you can put that in 1 SST. If more tests are ordered, 2 SSTs will be the most that is drawn. I will talk about an exception to that rule in a little bit. Vitamin D, B12, and male testosterone are generally ordered a little less often, would require a second tube. Now, say they order just a chemistry panel of vitamin D, that's 2 tests that can be drawn in 1 tube. We can test off a remarkably little amount of blood as long as these tubes are full. So the most if a participant would have drawn would be 2 SSTs and 2 lavender tops. The lavender, the complete blood count and the hemoglobin A1C can be drawn into 1 lavender tube. If they have blood typing, we do need a second tube because that goes to a different department and needs to be sent off in a separate direction. For those of you who have done this before, you might notice that it says complete blood count as in a CBC, as opposed to the blood count that we used to do, which was only 4 components out of the full CBC. We decided, the medical team decided, and leadership decided that the complete blood count, a full CBC, is what your physician is used to saying. It's what participants are used to saying when they get their blood drawn clinically. It provides a little bit more information. So we did go to that full panel. So that's a little bit different this year. It still can be combined with that hemoglobin A1C because my techs are wizards upstairs. So the COVID antibody as an add-on test can be pulled from any of the SST tubes. So 1 or 2 tubes is enough. I need very little for a COVID antibody. And again, all of this stuff, there's going to be handouts that have volume and tubes and pictures of packing. All that stuff is going to be in your book. So I know I go through it quickly here, but there are going to be resources for you to look at when you see those books. More phlebotomy procedure checklist. So the participant is going to present with a requisition. We have what we call a paper requisition, which is something they fill out the day of the fair. We have electronic requisitions, which are filled out electronically at home and prepaid and printed off by the participant, brought to the fair. I have examples of all of that we can look at in just a minute. There is a form check procedure that people go through before they get to phlebotomy. However, the phlebotomist is our last chance to catch any errors and make sure we've got the right forms. I cannot tell you how often a husband and wife register together and exchange paperwork. And so that's the opportunity to make sure and verify that the patient in front of them is the correct person, that their address is marked, date of birth. We do need the sex marked on the requisition. That affects reference ranges. And obviously the test order has to be marked. Hours fasting, we'd like to have that information. It's not 100% important, but it does affect reference ranges. So test order must be marked, and it must show that things have been paid for in some way, whether it's a voucher, it's marked credit, it's marked check, it's marked cash. If the tests are not marked, if there's no money indicated, or if they, on that 3-part paper requisition, if they present in the back with the green cashier copy, they have skipped a step. So at that point, we're going to send them back to the cashier and make sure they clear all of that up. Then they can come back and get their blood drawn. It is very important that all those things are checked. So full tubes, I'm going to say this 100 times, but we can test off a very little amount of blood, but we do need the tubes full completely. So again, when you're, as a lab supervisor, when you're walking the room, just double check, look at people's volume on how full they're drawing their tubes. That might be a time to say, hey, can you please make sure that you fill the tube a little bit more full? I can't have too much sample. So when the phlebotomist has completed the draw, the way that I do this is I remove the needle, I press that gauze down on the hole, and I ask the participant to hold some pressure right there on that gauze. While they're doing that, I'm going to label the tube in front of the participant to avoid any errors. This gives the participant a chance to verify that I'm doing everything correct. So I'm going to need their full name, last and first. We add time of collection to these draws because your centrifuge people may or may not be medical, but they will know that they're to spin at 30 minutes. So time of collection is important on the tubes. We like to have the phlebotomist initial each tube, and part of the reason for that is, again, if short tubes are making it back all the way to centrifuge or things are illegible, well, hopefully you can read their initials, we can trace that back to whoever has that error and help correct that error so that it gets to the lab and we can read it and use it for testing. There are also stickers that are involved with all these requisitions. The paper requisition has a sticker actually printed on the form that needs to be wrapped around the top of the tubes. I'll talk about the electronic stickers in a bit. Tubes are to be inverted 8 to 10 times gently after they are drawn. They are not to be shaken. They are that's just to mix the coagulant or the anticoagulant in there with the tubes. Phlebotomists are trained that from the get, so that shouldn't be a problem. We have the paper racks. So it's a rack that's got numbers 1 to 40 in it. Bottom left corner is number 1. We're going to start our first participant at number 1 and going back behind that. kind of vertically. We're going to place the tubes. I'll show you pictures of that and talk about that a little bit more. Paperwork that corresponds with, say, that first patient is to be taken and placed upside down under the box. What this does is it protects the patient privacy, so their neighbor doesn't get to come and see their personal information. It also keeps that paperwork in order with all the tubes. And that is very important, and I'm going to say that about 10 more times probably. It does have to come back to the lab in order. This is the beginning of a huge set of dominoes that process from a check-in process to a logging process to a pouring process that happens at the lab. So everything needs to come back here in order so that we can move through it quickly, because there's going to be a lot of tubes of blood around here. All right, so this is what we call the paper requisition. You guys are probably familiar with it if you've been to a fair or worked at a fair before. So I've got a few arrows just pointing out a couple things here. The first arrow on the top left here, all of that information in yellow is the patient demographics, and it is all important. They do not have to provide an email address. If they present with this paper requisition, they're not going to get their results electronically, only the people who register electronically. And that's just a safety thing. If I mistype in your email address, I could send something the wrong direction. So the electronic requisitions, since they come from an email address, we can verify that that is correct. So it's name, it's a full mailing address, including apartment number and zip, if the apartment number is applicable. We need one phone number. If they want to put two, that's fine. Most people generally just stick with a cell phone these days, but we don't need both phone numbers, just one good phone number. The reason I need that is in case there's some sort of a redraw or an issue, I can call this participant and talk about what the next steps are. Hours fasting is good information for us to have. Again, we've got male and female there for marking. And date of birth. Date of birth is important because that also determines reference ranges. If you go down to the left of that, there are a couple questions there. Those are optional questions, but that helps both 365 Health and Quest Diagnostics really see what population we're serving and maybe where we can reach out differently, or what else we could offer in a certain circumstance at a certain site if we know more about the participants that are utilizing this. You go all the way down there to the left, the other yellow highlight is a participant signature. That just acknowledges that you came of your own free will and you are going to sit down and have your blood drawn, and you agree that you are a participant here. On the bottom right, participant signature, that is actually a Medicare waiver. What it says is Medicare will not necessarily refund you for this testing. Medicare's got a lot of rules around that. Participants can try to get Medicare to refund it, but we need to make them aware that most likely Medicare is not going to do that. If we go back up to the middle section, the red and black area there, that is our test ordering area. So you're going to see the first column says code. That's the test number. The X's that are to be placed in that next column, that is what indicates what tests we're going to run. If we don't know what tests are ordered, we don't know how much blood to draw. So that's completely vital. All the way over to the right, it's going to say total. That is where it'll either say voucher or it will be marked with numbers, and a total will be added on at the bottom. That's the portion I'm saying. If it's not filled out, that person gets to go back to the cashier. At the very top on the right there, it's completely blank on this form because I can't print labels without printing up the rec. There's going to be strips of labels, and it's got that site number and it's got an individual number on it. That is that identifying mark that needs to go around each tube. Okay. Electronic requisitions. Most sites do about 50-50. We have a lot of electronic requisitions that come in now. It's convenient for the participant. They have the time to sit at home, really think about what tests they want. They prepay for it, so they're not going to come in and have to fill out paperwork. The idea is that they fill it out, they pay, and they print off that requisition at home and bring it into the fair that day. However, a lot of times people forget the printing and bringing to the fair. There is a paper form at the fair that if someone is an electronic order but forgot to bring their paperwork, people in the cashier station have a list so they can help them fill out that paper form, mark the test that they've already paid for. That's going to come on a white piece of paper similar to the electronic form, which you'll see in just a second. That is considered an electronic requisition. The electronic forms print 2 copies. There's the lab copy, which says lab copy on it, and then there's a second copy, which is for them to take around to any of the other stations at the fair, get their blood pressure written down, things like that. If somebody prints 2-sided, they don't get to take it with them. It becomes the lab copy because I don't know what tests to run unless I have a piece of paper in front of me. So they are welcome to go to the other stations. They'll just have to write their blood pressure down on just a regular old boring piece of paper. At the site, there are going to be strips of stickers to replace, since the paper requisition has the stickers that come on it. These are little strips of stickers that are to be used for the electronic recs. They have, I believe, 5 stickers on them. The top one is a barcode. That needs to be put onto the lab copy of the paperwork, and I will show you that again in a second. The other 4 stickers are just like the stickers on the paper requisition in that they have a site code and they have a unique identifier. So that needs to be placed around the top of the tube, just like the other stickers are. At the end of the fair, if the lab supervisor could gather up all those stickers that are unused from the phlebotomist and get those back either in our confidential envelope or back to somebody from 365 Health, we can actually reuse those if this fair chooses to run in the fall or run in the spring again. So again, a conservation thing. It's great if we don't have to just keep reprinting things that we already have. So yeah, just expect that there's going to be a lot of electronic requisitions. And here's what that looks like. So it looks very similar to the other requisition, the same kind of fields, except all of the demographic information and testing information is going to be marked already. So what we need from the participant is that they would fill out the number of hours fasting, and they're going to do a signature in the same area as the other form. If you look up to the top right there, where it says for 365 Health use only. Above that box is going to be a pre-printed barcode number, which is something that is generated at the time they order. Inside that box is where we're going to put the barcode label from that strip of stickers that's given out. Okay, and you guys actually will have a copy of each of these forms in your lab supervisor book so that you will have it for your own needs, and you can actually show your phlebotomists when you train them what they're going to be working with. Okay. There is an exception as far as the number of tubes drawn. There are a few sites that are going to have an RA study done. It's an ongoing study that's been done, I don't know how many years, but it's a really big study, and it's an amazing study in that it's very hard to get this many people to be in a study and get the diverse population that we are able to provide in this community fair setting. So if they are participating in an RA study, participant will get another requisition, and it's going to look like the one on your screen. It is green and it says Quest Diagnostics on it. What they need to fill out, again, is their demographic information. The requisition has a space for their insurance. They do not need to fill that out. So if they're worried about that, they don't need to. The RA study people will actually be at the fair, handing these requisitions out and helping participants to fill it out. So it's just something for the phlebotomist, again, to be aware that, oh, you missed your address or something. But these really do get looked at beforehand. There's only one test on this requisition, so there's only one thing that can be done. If this participant presents, pardon me, presents with 2 requisitions, so it would be either the paper requisition and this, or the electronic requisition and this. they would actually need to have a separate SST tube drawn just for this RA study. The stickers for this are down on the bottom right. So that's the site code for the RA study and the unique identifier. So those are the labels that need to be wrapped around the tubes. And just give me 2 seconds, drink some water here. Pardon me. Okay. Better, I apologize. So that is the only time that you might have 5 tubes drawn on a participant. When these come back to centrifuge, we need to spend those SST tubes that are for the RA study. And then those need to be separated off into an RA only rack to be boxed separately from the rest of the tubes. And again, all of this is going to be in your lab supervisor manual. I know I just touch on things, but you really can read more about it in some handouts that we've given. Excuse me. Okay, so that brings us to centrifuge, which is a vital part of this whole process. Phlebotomy is us getting the samples, centrifuging is us preparing the samples to be tested. Both steps are equally important. Your centrifugers are not going to have anything to centrifuge at the very beginning of the fair. So what I generally do as a lab supervisor is I have them come, and because they'll show up early as well, have them sign the centrifuge volunteer sign-in sheet, just like the phlebotomist did. And then I send them to go get coffee or something, because until you have blood to actually train these people, you're really focusing on phlebotomy. You're following the process as it goes. So your first training is going to be phlebotomist. You're going to make sure everybody's doing okay. Then when you get to the point where that's running smoothly, that's usually about a half hour in. You're going to have your centrifugers come back, and then you'll have time to give them a proper centrifuge training. There are diagrams and all kinds of photographs and things. And this, like I said, is just as vital as the phlebotomy training. The centrifuge group is really important to getting everything sent out correctly and make sure that our specimens arrive properly. So again, emphasize the importance of keeping everything together. This can be confusing for people that are not medical, because we only spin the SST tubes. We never spin the purple tops. So what we do is I've got a rack full of blood. I need to take participant 1 has 2 SSTs and 1 lavender. I need to take those SSTs out, get them spinning, and then at the end of that spin, I need to reunite them with their purple top that's been waiting out here for them and their paperwork. So it takes a certain bit of organization. I always find that it's helpful if you have one person kind of being the overseer of the centrifuge area, because that can really take some pressure off the lab supervisor. You can't be everywhere at once. The other thing that's really important about centrifuge is, like I said, they do need to clot for 30 minutes. They cannot sit for longer than 2 hours. So it is a timely process that needs to keep moving. If you have a centrifuge in front of you that's got 6 spaces for tubes, I'm going to load my first 6 tubes. As soon as they're done spinning, I can pull those tubes out, put the next 6 in, start them spinning, and then I have 15 minutes to sort and make sure and verify that all the tubes are matched back up with their paperwork and their purple friends in the rack. I don't like to see, when I'm a lab supervisor, I don't like to see the centrifuges sitting idle while someone is sorting. That's how things get backed up, and that really can cause a problem. Again, this workflow determines workflow down the line. So that's something to emphasize. And then there's also a packing procedure, which your centrifugers will be responsible for. And we're going to get into that as well. You doing good? Okay. So again, like I said, a centrifuge supervisor, if there's one person that just seems really organized, or they've done this before, that person can kind of oversee the whole centrifuge area, and help out. You're ultimately in charge of them, but if you find somebody really competent, I would take them up on their skills. There are two kinds of centrifuges that we will send out. Our CL2s are our workhorse giant centrifuges. They spin 16 tubes at a time. They do need to be set to 3.2 RPM and they run for 15 minutes. There's a little toggle switch on the front. When they get shut down, they reset themselves to 0. So it is important that the centrifuges are checked right before the fair to make sure that you've got those things set right. They're written on the centrifuge too, so you don't have to remember these numbers. We've had instances where they set up the night before, there was a power outage or someone shut the power off and nobody really knew to reset them. And so it was a lot of chaos. They thought they were spinning things properly and they weren't. So as a lab supervisor, that's one thing that I like to go through and check. What you're most likely to see if you're not a statewide site are our H centrifuges. They're smaller, they only hold 6 tubes, but we've got a lot of them, so there will be plenty. Those are preset for RPMs and they are preset for runtime. You couldn't change it if you wanted to. There is a centrifuge handout, it's a visual example of what a spun tube looks like, what packing looks like. Non-medical people may not know the difference between an unspun tube and a spun tube just visually. So that's why we made this handout. So you can hand those out and have them out on the tables. So it's really a good visual reminder of what needs to come back to the lab. And again, keep all those centrifuges spinning, work them. All right. Specifics, as I've said, they need to clot a minimum of 30 minutes. This is why we have them write the time of draw on the tube. So somebody can be timing this if they're not used to looking at tubes. They do need to be spun within 2 hours of the draw. The longer blood sits outside of the body, it starts to degrade and that can affect results. So there's a definite flow that needs to happen. SST is the only things that are spun. Like I've said, everything needs to be recollected and put back together in order with the paperwork. We don't spin the purple top tubes. If they do, they're not going to be able to get them out of the little cups anyway. So that's going to be a problem, but we can't test off the purple tops if they are spun. So that is important to emphasize. An unspun SST tube cannot be tested. It can't come back to the lab and I spin it and still test on it. That blood is no good anymore. So that results in a redraw. So it's very important that that is emphasized. At the end of the spinning process, when you're going to get them back into racks with their paperwork, if you've got a body we can hand that off to, and that person can just do a double verification that everything is in fact in order and that everything is in fact spun that needs to be, that is immensely helpful when it comes back to the laboratory. Okay, packing of specimens. First of all, so the RA specimens are going to get pulled off in this process with the RA requisitions in a separate box, and they're going to go in an RA only box. If possible, if you have enough bodies and someone organized and enough time, it is incredibly helpful if I have the electronic requisitions split off into different boxes than the paper requisitions. However, if that can't happen, that's okay. I can make people here do it. It's more important that everything stays in order. But if there is the opportunity to split those off, they get put into my computer system in very different ways. It's just something that helps the process move on through the rest of the night as we work. So when we get to packing of the specimens, we're going to take the full tube rack. We're going to put it inside a Ziploc bag. We are going to take that Ziploc bag, seal it, and we're going to put it into what we call a baker's box. It's a small brown box that fits that rack exactly. I'm going to have pictures of all this stuff in the end here. So we're going to place it into that small box. Then we're going to fold together one of our larger shipping boxes, and you'll know that they are the shipping boxes because they have a white sticker on the side that says lab specimens and some information to fill out. That needs to be lined with plastic. That's just a Department of Transportation safety feature. We're going to put the smaller boxes into the larger box. It will fit 6 of them in there. Seal up the plastic, seal the box, and complete information on the outer label. What I need from the outer label is I need to know what site these are coming from. So site number, site name, both is great. And I need to know how many of those large boxes are coming back to me. And the reason for that is if it says 3 out of 5, but I only have 3, I'm going to start making phone calls and looking where those other 2 boxes are. Perhaps they got set aside in a closet or something. So that gives me an opportunity to correct a massive error and keep it from happening. So that's what I need to know. You are welcome to count specimens. Tell me how many are in each little box. Give me a total count if you want. It is not necessary because I do it all electronically at the end of the fair, but some people really like to do that. So it's more information and it's kind of fun to know how much you've gotten done. So if your centrifuger wants to be keeping track like that, that's perfectly fine, but not necessary for my needs. Specimens are going to be collected by the lab courier along with all the supplies, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Real quick, and you're going to get this as a handout. This is kind of how we like to have our tubes racked, and it's very hard to explain on here, but you will get this handout so you can look at it. The top example are single test draws. So that's participant that had 1 tube drawn. It's usually the SST tube, which is what these are. They look a little different than the tiger tops you may be used to seeing, but they are exactly the same. The bottom left corner is position number 1. We're going to rack these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way to 10 in that first row horizontally. And then the next row again, again, and again. The second example here is participants who've had 2 tubes drawn. We're going to put the purple in front, the SST behind it, and then move to the right again. So this box would end up holding 20 participants. The last box is going to be for 3 or more tubes, 3 or 4 tubes. And that again is left to right with the participants lined up vertically. I know that that's really quick, and but you can figure it out from the photographs. Keep them in order. That's all that matters to me. This also kind of combines them so that you're going to use less of the shipping boxes and have everything as concise as possible. Packing images.
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
So does that mean then we're going to be reordering the forms then too?
You mean reordering how?
Well, obviously your participants don't come in, so they're not all single draws, say the SSTs. So,
right. So it's a sorting, it's a sorting process after the centrifuge process.
Gotcha. And so those forms need to be stacked in order based on your final ordering of shipping, right?
Yes.
Yep.
In order with whatever tubes are in that box. Correct. Okay. Thank you. Good question. And if any of this, you guys, if I'm going too fast or you guys have questions later, you'll get my contact information. Feel free to reach out and ask questions because I know this is a quick overview and there's a lot of details to what we do. So this is actual images of our specimen packing. So you see the full, these are the old tubes, but you see the full rack of tubes. Inside is a Ziploc bag sealed. It's going to go over, it's going to go into that smaller box, and we're going to put the requisitions associated with that rack into the box. We're going to close that up and then put it into the bigger box lined in plastic. And then, of course, you've all seen what a sealed cardboard box looks like, so I did not take a picture of that. All right. And there is such a thing called a confidential envelope. This is something that's in your lab supervisor book. What's important about the confidential envelope is that it does come back with the blood the day of the fair. It's going to have all those centrifuge and phlebotomy agreement forms in it. It's going to have any exposure or incident reports, which we'll touch on in a minute. I need on the front of that envelope to know what site this comes from. And what is the very most important thing that I see the day of the fair coming back here is the add-on and refund sheets that are from the cashier. The cashiers are trained to bring them back to the lab. But if the cashier has not done that, the lab supervisor needs to go to cashier and collect the add-on and refund sheets. The reason it is so vital for me is that if there is an add-on test I don't know about, I am under time constraints as far as how long the specimen can be added on, what they're good for. If I get that the day of the fair, as I'm getting this into the computer, I can make sure that those tests get added or removed if they no longer want them. So that is super important. It is a special little envelope, but truthfully, anything's going to be confidential sent back to the lab. So if you cannot find that the day of the fair, put it in a Ziploc bag. You're going to include it with the last box of blood. After you seal the plastic, just put that on top and seal up that big box. And it is confidential because I'm the one opening it. So it's kind of a chain of custody thing there. All right. After the fair, all lab supplies are going to come back to the lab. They're going to be picked up by the courier. The statewide sites are going to send centrifuges back with the courier. The couriers are aware of this, so they're going to expect to see the centrifuges. Metro sites will flow their centrifuges. So the centrifuge group just at the end needs to repack those centrifuges, stack them somewhere, and somebody's going to come get them. The other thing that's going to come back with your couriers are your sharps container, your biohazard. They are all to be snapped closed. I don't care if it's at the fill line or if it's got one needle in it. These need to be snapped closed and sent in safely. But what I mean by that is that we need to find a big cardboard box. The A boxes that your supplies come in are really good for this. Line it with a plastic bag, again, for safety. Those sharps are going to go in there. We're going to tie the plastic bag, seal up that box, and that box needs to be clearly marked that it is biohazard. That is a Department of Transportation regulation. On the terrible event that there would be an accident, the first responders need to know what they're dealing with when they come to a scene. Second of all, that's just for the safety of everybody concerned. So there are biohazard stickers that are included. They're kind of small and tend to get lost in all the chaos. I am perfectly fine if you, when that is sealed, write biohazard, write sharps all over the top of that box. That alerts everybody here at the lab that that box needs to be treated differently. It goes over here as far as from distinguishing from the regular supplies. The other thing that I want to touch on real quick, and it is going to be real quick, is the accidental needle stick exposure. I don't have a slide for it. It is included in your training manual. What you need to know is if somebody gets stuck, which is 99% of the time would be a phlebotomist getting exposed after they've drawn a participant, they stick themselves. What needs to happen is that your phlebotomists need to let you know about it. You're going to go to that station. We're going to send the phlebotomist to immediately wash his or her hands and kind of squeeze out that site. We're going to keep the participant at the table, and there's a phone number that you as the lab supervisor are going to call. We're going to notify any medical coordinators that are at the site, and you're going to call into the nurse at 365 Health, and that nurse is going to talk everybody through the procedure and what the next step is. I'm not going to go through them specifically, first of all, because I don't want to jinx us. We don't need any of these to happen. Second of all, it's a little bit complicated. So this is another reason it's very important to bring your book with you the day of the fair, so that should something happen, you've got that information right with you, and have the instructions to follow. If this does happen, that is something that would end up going in that confidential envelope, would be the paperwork for that and perhaps some blood tubes. So please make sure you review that ahead of time, so you're just a little familiar with it, but I hope you never have to use it. Okay, the question is, participant has to stay. What if they refuse to stay? That is fine. They can refuse to stay. The reason the participant stays is that we actually take their blood to test to make sure about any communicable diseases, and then we'll draw blood from the phlebotomist in a different setting to see if they've really been exposed. If the participant wants to leave, that's fine. But, and you can see this in the protocol, we actually take that blood and don't run their standard tests. We're going to end up using it for the prophylactic testing for the safety reason. Again, that that is something that when you call the nurse can speak with the participant, explain the intricacies of that, why that's happening. And they can also talk to the phlebotomist and see what the phlebotomist wants to do about it. So I hope I've answered that question. Yes.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Perfect. So on that note, I am done with my spiel. This is really heartfelt, this message I put at the end here. This is my dream job, and it's been a rough few years with the pandemic and everything, and to get everybody to come back and be on board. We could not do this without volunteers, without people willing to commit to helping their community and providing a service that's really, really unique in the healthcare world. And so I'm really happy that you guys are all here, and I so appreciate it. We certainly couldn't do it without you. So thank you for letting me do my dream job. I really appreciate it. If anybody has any other questions, I'm open to taking them. Sure, we got something in the chat. The RA tubes need to be kept with the rest of the tubes for a patient, or are they kept separately? When they are drawn in phlebotomy, they can be in the same rack, but at the end sorting process, I would like to see the RA tubes sorted out into a rack of just RA with their paperwork. Does that make sense? And again, what's most important to me is that I get the specimen and the paperwork for everybody back. If I do some sorting on my end, that's okay. But I need spun specimens and I need whatever paperwork goes with them. So if this becomes too complicated or too cumbersome, just get it back. The question is, can we make a separate draw station for the RA? We cannot. That would entail a second stick. And so if somebody is coming to get their regular blood drawn and they want to add on the RA, it's still just one stick and an extra tube. And people are much more likely to participate if they don't have to go get a second stick. So it is all done at once. And I understand it becomes confusing. Not every site is going to have the RA. If you want to email me later, I can let you know if your site does. But no, it's not a separate draw station. Yeah, good. Thank you. Good question. It does become a little confusing when we keep throwing these variables in. So in your lab supervisor manual is my contact information, as well as my partner in crime, Jerry Bebo, who has done this forever. We are always open to questions, suggestions. If there's something about this training that you liked or didn't like, I'm happy to hear about it. And you can always get to me through Alex or Kristen as well. If there are more questions.
I'll just jump in real quick and say, Melissa, thank you for putting all these details together and keeping everybody so organized. The liaisons for each healthcare site also have whether or not you are a rheumatoid arthritis site, that's an RA site. So if Melissa's really busy and you can't get to them, we can also tell you as well if you're an RA site. And I want to echo what Melissa said, that we can't do this without you guys. We can't do this without the phlebotomists, the site coordinators. You guys make it happen. You guys make the reach across the state happen. So thank you everybody for participating, and let Melissa and myself or your liaison, whoever you're directly working with, know if we can answer more questions.
Awesome. Thank you guys.